Dobra. Wchodzi.
We will go ahead and start. We have just 1 hour and a lot to discuss. So good afternoon and welcome to our side event, Ukraine's civilian hostages protecting the rights of missing and disappeared civilians, including human rights defenders, and finding ways for accountability and justice. This event is co-organized by the Center for Civil Liberties and the American Bar Association Center for Human Rights. Center for Civil Liberties is a leading civil society organization which focuses on human rights, democracy, and solidarity in Ukraine. Center for Human Rights, American Bar Association, provides technical legal assistance to at-risk defenders globally and monitors trials in over 60 countries. My name is Jasmine Cameron. I'm a senior legal advisor at the Center for Human Rights, and it is my honor today to moderate this panel and introduce you to our wonderful speakers. We are going to have 2 speakers here, and 3 speakers are joining by Zoom from Ukraine. We wanted to cover this problem and talk about disappeared defenders for a while. And so our organizations decided to work on a joint report, and it's actually just arriving here. We published it last night, so please take your time and take a look at the report. There is also a short summary of the report. When we talk about the disappeared defenders, first thing comes to mind that since the invasion in February 24th, the problem of disappearances have become so widespread and the victims are so numerous that they appear to be part of an official state policy to disappear and detain civilians who oppose the Russian invasion, occupation, and to terrorize the Ukrainian population and break local resistance. Between February 24th and June of this year, the Ukrainian government recorded more than 765 cases of forced disappearances, while Ukrainian National Police reportedly received more than 9,000 missing persons reports. By July, Ukrainian human rights monitors reportedly estimated that at least 600 people had been forcefully disappeared from the Kherson region alone. These disappearances constitute violations under the cluster of international norms, including international human rights law, international criminal law, and international humanitarian law. The law across these three legal frameworks is consistent in that it protects the same or similar fundamental rights of disappeared persons, their families, and imposing obligations on the violating state. Regardless of which legal framework you're using, it is clear that perpetrators are committing gross violations and must be brought to justice. Again, for more information, please take a look at our report. It has extensive legal analysis as well as specific cases, public cases. Today, it is my honor to introduce Alexandra Drick, our dear friend. Alexandra coordinates international cooperation in the Center for Civil Liberties, which has been documenting crimes against humanity and war crimes committed by the Russian army since 2014. Alexandra has extensive experience and background in advocacy on accountability reforms in Ukraine, in governmental, non-governmental sectors, EU projects in Ukraine. Her experience comes from working positions in the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Reforms Delivery Office of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, EU Anti-Corruption Initiative in Ukraine, NGO, and media. Alexandra will outline the scale of this problem today in Ukraine and also talk about the role of civil society that plays in protecting rights of disappeared. Next two speakers after Alexandra are going to be speakers that were very brave to volunteer their personal stories. We're going to join them by Zoom. First is going to be Arkady Davzhenko, who is the Ukrainian human rights defender and civilian activist in Kherson, who was illegally detained, kidnapped, intimidated, and tortured by the Russian military. After that, we're going to hear from Irina Vasilyeva, a Ukrainian human rights defender, and sister of Victoria Andrusha, a 25-year-old mathematics teacher, who was kidnapped and taken as a civilian hostage by the Russian military in Chernigov region. Her sister, Irina, will speak on her behalf, on behalf of Victoria, on the circumstances of her disappearance. Then we're going to hear from Yevhen Zakharov, a veteran human rights defender, member of the Ukrainian PEN. He is a chairman of the board of the Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union and director of the Kharkiv Human Rights Group. He was an activist in the dissident movement in the 70s and 80s. Mr. Zakharov is well respected by the Ukrainian people, politicians, media, and everyone else. Yevhen will describe his work supporting defenders and also underline the recommendations for international community, what could be done better to support NGOs. And last but not least, Professor Michael Newton, who is an expert on accountability, transnational justice, and conduct of hostilities issues, as well as terrorism. Professor Newton is an authority on the law of armed conflict and served as a senior advisor to the ambassador at large for war crimes issues in the US State Department from January 1999 to August 2002, during which he implemented a wide range of policy positions. He negotiated elements of crimes for the International Criminal Court. Professor Newton is admitted to the council list of the International Criminal Court, where he helped prepare the appeal of Jean-Pierre Bemba and has participated in oral arguments at the appeal chamber in other cases. Professor Newton is going to be covering international aspect of these crimes and summarizing and analyzing, but also I would like to hear from Professor Newton to continue discussion that was previously covered at 2 o'clock side event, right? Specifically, I'm curious to hear his thoughts about crime of aggression and what are the options for accountability. So now, Alexandra, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. I believe we have a lot of interesting testimonies to to hear today from the survivors of the war crimes committed by the Russian army in Ukraine, as well as very distinguished panelists. So I will just bring a very brief overview of the issue of the civilian hostages as such. The Center for Civil Liberties, which has co-established a coalition of organizations called Tribunal for Putin, has been documenting crimes committed by the Russian army in Ukraine. And in fact, illegal detention of civilians is remaining one of those crimes that are being constantly committed by the Russian army under the command of the Russian government. And as of 23rd of September, we know about 651 cases of civilians being illegally detained, either on the occupied territories of Russia or Belarus. Out of those people, 10 people were killed, 236 people were released, 405 people are currently detained. And we only know about the whereabouts of these people for 94 of them, meaning that Russian government would ignore the request that would be coming from either Ukrainian side or the family members of these people. We cannot confirm this information of them being detained in particular places. One of the ways how we get information about these people being in particular detention centers is indeed from those people who were released. So basically, when these people come back to Ukraine, they would be able to provide information on those who were kept in the same premises with them. And that's one of the ways, just for your understanding, how we discover that certain particular people are being detained in particular places. Obviously, having the civilian hostages is a huge violation of the international law, in particular the Geneva Convention, Fourth Geneva Convention, which protects civilians. And in fact, Russia cannot have civilian hostages as such at all. However, we have been receiving these numerous reports and information, including the testimonies from the survivors, that these people are being constantly tortured, they're being kept in inhumane conditions, they don't have access to medical care, they don't have access to legal assistance, they are not allowed to get in contact with their relatives. And as a matter of fact, it is very difficult for us to even identify their exact whereabouts, except for some very difficult ways. One of them I just provided. There is a number of ways. One important thing that you need to understand in this context, there is a number of ways how a Ukrainian can become a civilian hostage. One of them is during the process of so-called deportation, when people from the occupied territories are being transferred, forcibly displaced to either other occupied territories, to the territory of Russia or territory of Belarus. All these people, and the approximate number, estimated number, is somewhere between 1 and 2 million. Nobody can give you exact numbers, but the estimation is somewhere between 1 and 2 million. So all these people are forced to go through the so-called process of filtration, which is again, a huge violation of the rights and the human rights of these civilians. And I'm pretty sure that I will be able to provide you more information on filtration in particular, because this is a separate and very huge topic. What happens to these people is that if for some reason they don't pass this filtration, they end up in so-called filtration camps. Which you can only compare to concentration camps. In these filtration camps, people would again be treated inhumanely. They would not have access to medical care or legal assistance. They will be tortured, and people would be kept there for months. Then, from those filtration camps, they might be transferred to detention centers to the territories of Russia or Belarus again. And all these people, and the estimated number of people that are currently being kept in so-called filtration camps, is somewhere between 20,000 and 100,000. Again, nobody can give you an exact number, but the recent satellite images published reveal that there are mass graves close to this so-called filtration camps, which means that people might be killed or tortured to death. So we know about at least 19 filtration camps on the occupied territories, while some recent investigations confirm that there might be at least 21 filtration camps. And it's possible that the number of those filtration camps will be growing as more and more people are being illegally detained. All these people, regardless of how they got into this position, find themselves in the position of civilian hostages. Another way, and this is something that has been explicitly covered in this report, is when people are being kidnapped. And those are activists, journalists, opinion leaders, representatives of local authorities. All these people, and the particular cases, the legal analysis for which has been provided in this report, again, become civilian hostages, and they face the same challenges while they are being kept in the detention centers. I believe this is the time to give the floor to our next speakers, but if there are any questions, I will be happy to provide more details later on.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Now we are going to go to Arkady Davzhenko on Zoom. He offered to share his story.
Dear friends, слава Україні! Witam, panie i panowie. My name is Arkady. I'm Ukrainian. I'm from Kherson town. And before this spring, I was ichthyologist. And my work was just aquaculture, fish for food, trout, sturgeon, something like this. But from this spring, probably, I'm civilian activist because I was head and voice of protest rally, old protest rally at Kherson town, when this my town was occupied by Russian army. We made that protest rally without any weapon every day. It was almost a month from the first days of March and almost to the finish of April. But at the 21st of April, probably some charged part of Russian army decided to shut us and begin to use something like grenades, gas, and other bad things for us. And it was finished of our protest rally, because from that day it was absolutely impossible. And at that day, it was like I told before, 21st of April, Russian soldiers caught me at the middle part of Kherson town. It was 2 persons with masks, with automats. They blinded my eyes by my head and took me to the basement of our police building, probably in the middle part of Kherson town. And it was beginning of my captivity. As for me, it was long, because when you're at captivity, every minute's longer than a year. It was 7 days. It was 7 days at a cold, wet basement, almost without food, without water, normal water, without any medicine. Plus, all times, every day, I had many interrogations. Probably interrogations was every 2 or 3 hours. And it is not so hard to count how many interrogations was after 7 days. Plus, it was not only speaking at that interrogations, Like a result of all of that, Russian soldiers broken at my ribs, leg. I had brain connection, was very strong brain connection, but I'm happy what I'm still alive. It's strange, but it's true. I'm glad what I see you. I'm glad what I can speak now, because for biggest part of the same people, it's absolutely impossible. Biggest part of the same civilians still at different basements or somewhere far from Ukraine. Sometimes is Krim, sometimes is Siberian part of Russian Federation, or many part of that people are dead. It's very hard to say correct, but it's not so hard to hear or to saw when you are at some basement around you. You hear painful, you saw blood, you feel all of this. What I can tell more, after my freedom, I'm happy what after all of this, Russian warriors decide what after this, no one normal man or woman can't don't broken not only about bones, don't broken psychologically. And in this case, for Russian army at Kherson town, I cannot be like something dangerous because at 7th day of my captivity, I was like something like a zombie, because without food, without normal sleep, it was very painful. Yeah, I was not so nice. After all of that, I tried to find some way. First of all, for medicine, because it was not so easy and occupied town without medicaments. Plus, when your bones are broken, for example, I have some picture. For example, here is my ribs. Probably biggest part of us are not doctors, but it is not so important, because you can see one part of ribs and the same part of ribs are not the same. Because when your bones regenerate without medicine, regeneration is not so well like we want. And the same story. This is a photo of my right leg, bones of my right leg, probably so. And the same story, it is broken and I still have some problems with all of this. After freedom, after some regeneration of my bones, I tried to find some ways how I can to run, to leave occupied Kherson region. I found these ways. It was very long, it was hard, very dangerous, because many checkpoints. I tried to move from the Kherson town to the Kryvyi Rih town. It's some of the middle part of Ukraine. And between Kherson and Kryvyi Rih town, something like 50 checkpoints of Russian soldiers. At every checkpoint, they check you, your documents, your car, your bag, your, for example, pictures on the photo, if you have some to pay to. That's why in this case, time after time, it looks like a striptease show at the road, because they try to find some words about Ukraine or on your skin, some tattoo, and it looks like weird. When we was with my friends at the last checkpoint, at the gray zone, the gray zone is territory between Russian army and Ukrainian forces. We knew what last checkpoint is dangerous. It's more aggressive warriors, is the most dangerous checkpoint. And we were so happy what they don't check us. They just tell, run, 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 drive fast, fast, fast. And we were so happy. Oh, so close, our sweet Ukraine, our warriors, our don't occupied territory. They giveaway from us. And when Russian soldiers was far from us, and we was in the gray zone, they began shot us. They used grenade launcher. Cars, what was in the first part of our team, they was broken it by Russian grenades. I was in the middle part of all that cars. That's why I'm still alive. And it was absolutely correct idea. Let's give freedom way from civilian Ukrainian people. Civilian people with young babies, childs, old women and men without any weapon. And they began shot us by grenade launcher. But probably I'm lucky guy, I'm still alive. Now I'm volunteer, I'm trying to find some ways how I can help our warriors for our victory. Now yes.
Arkady, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have very little time and we have to move on to next. But again, thank you so much for sharing with your story. Please don't hang up. We are going to have questions at the end. If you can please stay online. Next, we have Irina Vasilyeva, who is going to be sharing the story of her sister-in-law, Victoria Andrusha, also joining by Zoom. Hi, Irina. We can hear you.
Доброго дня.
Irina is going to be talking in Ukrainian and Alexander is going to be translating.
Yes, I will help out with the translation. Ірино, так, доброго дня, можете говорити. Я буду перекладати, тільки зупиняйтесь, будь ласка.
Я зрозуміла, дякую. Доброго дня, мене звати Ірина, я сестра Андруші Вікторії, яка...
Good afternoon, my name is Irina, I'm the sister of Victoria Andrusha.
Яка зараз перебуває у полоні Російської Федерації.
Who is being a civilian hostage detained in the territory of Russian Federation.
Моя сестра Вікторія після вторгнення 24 лютого російських військ на територію України покинула Бровари і поїхала в село Чернігівської області до батьків.
My sister, after the full-scale invasion in February, my sister left the area of Brovary and went to her parents in Chernihiv Oblast.
В Броварах вона працює і працювала вчителем математики та інформатики в школі.
She used to work as a teacher, as a math teacher in Brovary at the school.
27 лютого їх село було окуповане російськими військами, і сестра перебувала там разом із батьками.
On the 27th of February, the village was occupied by the Russian army, and the sister was with her parents there at this time.
На території села російські війська робили безлад, ходили по домівках, шукали зброю, забирали особисті речі, цінні речі, а також побутове приладдя.
So the Russian soldiers in this village, when it was occupied, would wander around the village, enter the houses, collect equipment they could find in houses, were searching for weapons.
Зв'язку з родиною майже не було, і тому якби ми періодично переписувалися СМС, щоб хоча б дізнатися, чи всі живі і чи все в них добре, і як батьки.
The network and connection was bad at the time, so we only had a chance to send text messages to each other just to check if everybody is alive.
25 березня до будинку батьків увірвалися російські солдати і почали перевертати все в будинку. Вони почали шукати зброю, перевіряти і забирати телефони всіх рідних.
On the 25th of March, Russian soldiers entered the house of the parents and they were looking for weapons, but they basically turned the entire house upside down.
В телефоні сестри було смс, яке адресоване мені, що на їхню вулицю заїхав БТР.
They were also taking away the phones, and in the phone of my sister, Russian soldiers find a text message saying that there is a military machine Russian military machine that entered the village, and that text message was addressed to me.
І саме це смс стало причиною, що її забрали з дому.
And this text message was the reason why she was taken from home, detained.
Вони сказали, що вона була наводчиця і що через неї на території села постраждало дуже багато їхніх солдат.
Okay, I don't know how to translate this one. Okay. Right. That they said that she was providing information, and because of her, many people on the territory of this village were suffering.
Також вони позабирали комп'ютер, документи батьків, телефони, кошти, навіть особисті речі сестри.
They were also taking a lot of things, like telephones and the personal stuff of the parents.
Вони, коли забирали сестру, то стріляли в тата, маму теж допитували, маму забирали і утримували в чужому підвалі сусіднього села 3 суток.
When they were shooting at dad, and when they were taking away the sister, and mother was also facing violations.
Вікторію бачили полонені, які утримувалися в підвалі цього клубу сусіднього села, і там вона допомагала раненим обробляти рани.
Victoria was seen in the basement or in the village next to this one, where she helped the wounded to treat the wounds.
Як говорили чоловіки полонені, то Вікторія розмовляла виключно українською мовою, що російським військам не дуже подобалося.
What the men who were also detained were telling is that Victoria would only speak Ukrainian, which Russian soldiers didn't like.
Полонені чули також, як вони говорили, що Вікторію забирають з собою, будуть судити за їхніми законами або для обміну полоненими.
They also said that Victoria will be taking with them, might be also tried together with POWs.
Останній раз Вікторію бачили 27 березня на території села.
Victoria was seen for the last time on the 27th of March in this village.
Ну, вони говорили, що вона наводчиця, але вона насправді звичайна цивільна вчителька інформатики та математики в школі.
The Russian soldiers would say that she's providing information while she's just a math teacher at school.
Коли село звільнили 31 березня, ми почали шукати Вікторію скрізь, де тільки могли, по підвалах, лікарнях і моргах.
When the village was deoccupied on the 31st of March, we started to look for Victoria everywhere in every basement.
Також почали розкидати інформацію по соцмережах, можливо, вони десь залишили її в сусідньому селу по лінії свого відступу.
We were also spreading information through via social media, trying to identify maybe they have left her somewhere in other villages on their way.
Але все було марно, інформації не було ніякої.
But we couldn't find any information.
13 квітня вранці зателефонували люди, які були звільнені 12 квітня, і повідомили, що сестра знаходиться на території Росії в Курську в СІЗО номер 1.
On the 13th of April, there was a call from people that were released on the 12th of April that said that Victoria is being detained on the territory of Russia in Kursk, in detention center number 1.
За словами свідків, у СІЗО до Вікторії відносилися дуже жахливо, і також до українських полонених.
According to the witness testimonies, Victoria was ill-treated as well as POWs.
На допити водили по декілька разів і навіть застосовували тортури.
She would be taken to interrogations a number of times and even tortured.
Зі слів полонених, Вікторію били дубінкою по спині, вона втрачала свідомість, і також у неї йшла кров носом, і медичної допомоги належної не.
According to the information, according to the witness testimonies, she would be beaten by a baseball bat, and she would fade out, and she also was bleeding. Her nose was bleeding.
Ми робили спроби написати листа в дане СІЗО, але результату це ніякого не дало.
We made attempts to send a letter to this detention center, but there was no result.
Ми дану інформацію, яку знали, повідомили в усі можливі інстанції нашої держави. І також звернулися до Комітету Міжнародного Червоного Хреста, щоб допомогли дізнатися хоч якусь інформацію про стан її здоров'я, місце знаходження, щоб хоча б передати якісь можливі засоби гігієни, необхідні ліки та відповіді, допомоги ми на даний час не отримали.
We provided this information to all the state authorities in Ukraine as well as the International Committee of Red Cross for us to at least identify her whereabouts or any information about her.
Російський Червоний Хрест підтвердив перебування Вікторії у полоні, але не зазначив місця її перебування.
The Russian Red Cross has confirmed that Victoria is being detained, but never provided any information on where exactly she is being detained.
І також ми отримали листа від Вікторії, але лист був ми отримали листа 26 серпня, а він був датований 25 травня.
We also received a letter from Victoria dated 26th of August. While the initial letter was written on the 24th of May.
Лист був написаний рукою Вікторії, але там тільки загальні фрази: «Я жива, я в полоні».
This letter was handwritten by Victoria. But it only contained very general information that I'm alive, I'm being detained.
Ми переживаємо за життя таких, як вона, і за Вікторію, оскільки люди потребують медичного лікування.
We are worried about Victoria and people like her because she and all these people might need medical assistance.
У Вікторії теж є проблеми із серцем, вона має захворювання хронічний ларингіт і також проблеми з колінним суглобом. Тому ми переживаємо їх і таких, як Вікторія.
Victoria has a heart disease and she needs treatment, so which she probably is not getting, just as other civilian hostages.
Irina, thank you so much. We are heartbroken for you and for Victoria. Thank you for sharing your story. Please don't hang up yet. We are going to have some questions later. We are short on time, but we are next going to Evgen Zakharov, also on Zoom.
Thank you. It's difficult to say after two last presentations in general. I would like to describe our approach to monitoring the rights of civilians deprived of liberty on the territories occupied by Russia. There are two types of the places of captivity. In the occupied territories, part of the places of captivity, as it turned out, had such a status before the occupation. These are institutions designed for the execution of sentences, pretrial investigation centers, pretrial detention centers, and different social institutions. This group of institutions can be called official places of captivity. In fact, a large number of the hybrid institutions where the occupying state actually keeps people do not have any official status and are not equipped with proper accommodations. Among these institutions are old buildings served as places of detention, which today are in disrepair and unsuitable for keeping people. Places for other purpose, for example, industrial, but they are used by the occupiers to keep people only because they have large premises as well as the means to guard them, hangars, warehouses, workshops, etc. All these institutions can be combined into one group, places of captivity which are not official. Let's give a classification of people who are kept in places of captivity. Firstly, these are those convicted by the courts of Ukraine and other persons legally who were in official places of captivity as of April 2014 and at the time of the full-scale Russian military invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and remaining in these places at the moment when they came under the control of the occupying state. Secondly, these are prisoners of war and civilians from the occupied territories and areas where active hostilities are taking place. If a person is not a combatant but placed in places of captivity controlled by the occupying state, regardless of grounds for such captivity, such a person can be considered as a civilian hostage. Thirdly, these are persons who are held in places of captivity for the purpose of filtering, providing for the establishment of personal data of the detainee, his attitude to occupying state, willingness to cooperate with its authorities and services. On formal grounds, this group can be classified as civilian hostages, but requires special additional attention. According to information available today, such camps contain officers of law enforcement, other employees of government and local self-government bodies, public figures, business leaders, people with significant social contacts, volunteers, people who publicly express their position in support of legitimate state power and the like. Fourthly, these are the missing persons. They are also detained in one of the places of deprivation of liberty, but nothing is known about their whereabouts for a long time. Fifthly, these are persons against whom criminal cases have been opened and who are being held in the status of suspects according to the rules of the criminal procedure legislation of the Russian Federation or pseudo-state entities controlled by it. The received and collected information is entered into a database which makes it possible to analyze and summarize. Some words about results of the monitoring. To date, the Tribunal for Putin Initiative database contains more than 20,400 cases of crimes. In particular, we fixed more than 2,500 victims of disappearances, We qualified 765 cases as enforced disappearances when no information about the location of the victims was not provided. This data indicates that disappearances are one of the components of the policy of the occupying authorities. Mass enforced disappearances are covered by the Roma Statute of the International Criminal Code as a crime against humanity. Let's take a closer look at filtering.
Evgen, I apologize. We need to move on
Okay,
now,
okay,
but please
wait
for the question. Thank you so much, Evgen. Now, Professor Newton, take the floor, please.
Well, I actually agree. I'm so glad that you all are here to see and hear from real victims. And I want to say a couple of prefatory comments, and then I want to describe some things about this report that you've all gotten. I worked on it, and I don't even have a copy, so you're lucky. Take it, and if you got a copy, please read it. Find it on the internet. I mean, those are the first hard copies anywhere. So take the time to go through them. A couple of prefatory comments. I interviewed a witness one time in the Milosevic trial, and I knew she was an important witness. I knew she had vital testimony for our case. And, you know, she'd suffered terribly. And she looked at me and she said, Professor Newton, she said, what's the point? Nothing will ever happen. You're just collecting information and nobody will ever be prosecuted. Milosevic will never stand trial. And I said, ma'am, I can't tell you when, I can't tell you how. But justice demands accountability. And, you know, the politicians and the diplomats, and I'm a trial lawyer, we always talk about justice. I want you to know that we will be tireless in pursuing justice. Her testimony, her statement, was a critical piece of the Milosevic indictment when the time came. Okay? You can't look at these people or read about these accounts in this report and then say it goes in the trash can or the recycling bin and you want to forget about those stories. So the way I always say it is that the facts are what allows us to pierce the propaganda. Right? When you see the false fake news and the false reporting, it's the facts and the collection of those facts that allows us to then go into an open court of law and establish the historical record in a way that rebuts all the propaganda, all the distortion. Here's the record. But it's not a paper record. It's the story of what these people have suffered times 20,000, okay? I want you to take that away. But the reality is that it's the feeling of these people and so many other stories. Now, this particular report just focuses on the detentions, the forcible abductions, in legal terms, what we would say forcible transfer or deportation. Okay, the technical distinction being deportation just means you crossed an international boundary. Okay, think the Rohingya genocide case, or the Rohingya crimes against humanity case and genocide case at the ICC. It's a detention case because you crossed the border into Bangladesh. It's the paradigmatic example. So in light of that, I think it's the feeling, really understanding these stories, that fuels the diplomacy. And it cannot get dissipated by time. We have to maintain that, and I really believe that. In conjunction with that, one side note that I promised to make in response to her question earlier is the crime of aggression. We can't pretend that international law means something and that the rules-based international order means something if we just allow rampant aggression to go unpunished. And I disagree with the comment earlier as a technical matter. I can think of a bunch of technical ways of overcoming personal immunity in the context of crimes of aggression. But we have to do it. And that takes political will. So what you end up with is this marriage of trial evidence and trial information paired with political will. And the only thing I would say on that is that it's not enough to have a tribunal. It's not enough to have a jurisdictional statute and personal jurisdiction. It requires technical expertise to help Ukrainian judges, who are the courts of first instance. It requires technical assistance and maybe some funding and maybe a lot of effort goes into the actual implementation of trials. And on the crime of aggression, the only thing I would say is this is exactly the problem that we faced in setting up the Special Court for Sierra Leone. I was on the UN planning mission that set up that court. There's a gap in the law, and you can pretend that, no big deal. But I walked a UN camp where the RUF had gone through and chopped off children's hands. There's 5,000 of them with no hands. Can you really look in the mirror and say, it's a different problem for a different day? And I would say the exact same thing about these people in Ukraine that have suffered. It must bring justice. And all the talk about accountability, I want you to let the personal stories fuel you. That's why we did this report on forcible deportation transfers, to help illuminate the categories of people: journalists, human rights defenders, innocent civilians, or what we would call protected persons within the meaning of the Fourth Geneva Convention, mayors, right? All of the above. And so I just wanted to very briefly describe what's in the report and, more importantly, why it's important. And I know that sounds self-serving because I wrote the foreword and I worked on the report, but it's a very good report, I promise you. It really is. Well, I quoted Robert Jackson in the foreword that the Russians have committed crimes across Ukraine with Machiavellian shamelessness, and that's true. They're there for all the world to see. And if the world does nothing, that's on us, and that's on our children and our grandchildren. It's our responsibility to do justice, not in words, but in actual deeds. So what this report does is to dissect this big category of crimes into its constituent elements. The first section is on human rights violations, which we all know, right? These are human rights violations, and we tell you why, and we describe some of the applicable law. It's not a book. I could do a whole book on the human rights piece of forcible detention and forcible transfer. But in this instance, sometimes people will falsely portray that human rights are one camp and the law of war, which is my technical expertise, is another camp, and crimes against humanity is another piece. Here, these bodies of law are what I call coterminous. It's different approaches to protect exactly the same underlying right. Okay, so what we have to do is say, here's the human rights category, and the value of using that is in this way. Okay? Here's the crimes against humanity category, right? Equally authoritative in terms of personal criminal responsibility, or what we would say individual criminal responsibility. So the crime against humanity of persecution absolutely applies to political officials. The crime against humanity of inhumane acts, and of course the crimes against humanity, provided that we have the documentary evidence, which we're getting from people on the ground, to prove that these are crimes pursuant to or in furtherance of a state organizational plan or policy. The evidence is there. It's up to us as an international community how we use it. And then lastly, there's a section on grave breaches, a section on, and again, I could show you a dozen different places in the Geneva Conventions. This morning on the panel, they used the broad phrase international humanitarian law. That's true, but I also think it's too generic, because you miss the real descriptive, normative character of these crimes. These are grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions. And because they're grave breaches of the 1949 conventions, it overcomes personal immunity, it overcomes sovereign immunity, it overcomes official immunity, and that actually, in legal terms, is the source of our universal jurisdiction, right? Because all member states, every UN member state, has the obligation, not the policy preference, the obligation under the conventions to prosecute or extradite and to share evidence and to facilitate prosecution. That's the legal significance of putting this into the grave breach category. But you see, it's additive, because we're going to charge crimes against humanity, and we're going to charge grave breaches, and we're going to charge violations of Article 75 of Protocol 1, which the Russians are full signatories to. There's a lot of law here. And I just want to leave you, circle back to this big concept of annexation, which is the mother crime of them all, right? It's the aggression. Forcible transfer is really the precursor crime to annexation, and therefore a violation of the very foundational principles of the UN Charter. Now, we know that. The question is, what are we going to do with it? And this report is a very small first step towards building. It won't be the last step by any means. But I think we owe it to the victims here to maintain the North Star. And the North Star are the words we always say of accountability and documentation and justice. But those have to be more than just hollow promises. And I'm a prosecutor, so I can tell you, in one way or another, I can tell you lots of stories of what this looks like if you're interested. And with that, we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Professor. Good job. keeping it short. So I would like to open the floor for the questions. We have just 4 minutes left. Maybe we can ask a couple of questions. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Michael Specjalski from the Pantory Foundation, based in Warsaw, Poland. I have a question to Professor Newton. I have a question about what is the practice to bring those perpetrators to justice, because, like you said, of course, the Russia Federation is not a party of the Rome Statute, but Ukraine acknowledged the Rome the jurisdiction of International Criminal Court. So those soldiers who committed crimes and gonna be caught on the ground, they can be prosecuted by the Ukrainian prosecutor or international court, of course. And you mentioned Robert Jackson, the U.S. prosecutor that was a prosecutor of the Nazis in the Nuremberg tribunal, so an ad hoc military criminal tribunal. Mm-hmm. So because we heard that there's idea of tribunal for Putin. So there should be an ad hoc criminal tribunal, but first of all, Russia must lose the war, because in this case, I don't see any possibility to bring to justice the political, perpetrators who conduct this like in practice.
Yeah, I would say the same. Well, people said the same about Radovan Karadzic will never stand trial. Milosevic will never stand trial. And we orchestrated a political change of circumstances. Same for Charles Taylor. We got Charles Taylor in the dock, and nobody thought that was ever going to be possible. Here's what I'd say about that, because I wrote a report for the U.S. Agency for International Development that is in the Verkhovna Rada now. And a lot of people, I think, have what I think is a mistaken notion. It's a binary. It's either domestic or it's the ICC. We need them all. Is anybody really going to be satisfied if the ICC does 3 people and we say, all right, great, done, right? And so I was asked specifically the question, does Ukraine need to ratify the Rome Statute right now? And my answer is unequivocally no, because they have jurisdiction, but it's an integrated architecture. There's plenty of crimes and plenty of criminals to go around. So it's not just Ukrainian prosecutors. It's going to be Germans, Belgians, Australians. These are universal jurisdiction crimes. And we need to work cooperatively to share evidence across international boundaries. Right now, in my personal opinion, it's still too balkanized. It's still too blocked up in these stovepiped channels where we're not fully sharing. And we've got to overcome that. But there's plenty of cases to go around. I think that for any prosecutor to be turfish and say, with all respect, even the Ukrainians, there's going to be a bunch of cases that the Ukrainians can't handle. And they need to be eager to transfer those people, to transfer the evidence to courts with proper jurisdiction. It's going to take the way I say it, and I think I said this in the introduction, a whole of the free world approach. If you're in the free world and you believe in justice, you have a responsibility to help prosecute. Full stop.
Thank you, Professor. Any other questions maybe for other speakers? Please? And then we'll take your question.
You mentioned universal jurisdiction, and what do you think the courts, the national courts of other jurisdiction, are they ready to exercise universal jurisdiction against the Russian war criminals, the soldiers or politicians who committed crimes against humanity or crimes of aggression? What do you think? Are the national courts ready to exercise such kind of jurisdiction as, for example, Spain arrested Pinochet, this very landmark case of universal jurisdiction? Is it possible with regard to Vladimir Putin or any Russian official?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is how I've spent my career. On the ground, helping judges.
Newton, very, very briefly, because we have one more question.
Give me 30 seconds. Okay. Start the clock now. This is how I've spent my career. And this is the one thing I'm really, really proud of are those elements of crimes. Those elements of crimes to which the United States, we joined consensus on those. They are the authoritative, dispositive statement of every actus reus, mens rea for every single one of those Rome Statute crimes. And that serves the leveling function across every domestic court around the world. And I can't tell you the times I've sat in front of judges and said, here's the precise aspects of the law. And when you do this in Iraq, Uganda, wherever, You're doing exactly the same thing they would be doing in The Hague in the ICC, or in Germany, or Sweden, or Belgium, or Spain, or France, or every other state party. So let's get the law right. To me, it's about the integrity of the law.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. My name is Rafael Nageli. I'm the ambassador of Switzerland to the OSCE. We are meeting here in the framework of the OSCE. So my question is, in which respect the OSCE, in which respect the United Nations, in which respect ODIHR can contribute to advance the international criminal justice?
Alexandra, do you want to take this?
Well, obviously, in the present circumstances, and we have been very clear on that, we have been advocating a lot for the establishment of the International Tribunal. So if OSCE could support that, would definitely help a lot. Not only because, and here's the thing with the international criminal justice, it should have also a preventive function. Knowing that this punishment is inevitable might also, and should, I believe, also have an effect on Russian military and political in first instance, leadership being willing to continue this war. And the more real these perspectives look, the less they will be inclined to continue it. And I think that's a very important point that we should always remember when we talk about accountability in general. Because even in the case with the ICC, the way ICC operates, it will only take a couple of episodes, that's it. Well, I don't think that everybody, even in this room, understands how ICC operates. They will only take a couple of episodes, full stop. That's not the accountability for all these crimes that Russian army has committed in Ukraine. I know that Professor Newton wants to add to that, so I'll give the floor.
I was asked one time by an Iraqi judge in the context of the Anfal genocide case. He said to me, he said, Professor, he said, will they read our opinions one day like the way they read the International Military Tribunal from Nuremberg? And probably I was a little bit disrespectful. I snapped back at him in Arabic. If you write those kind of opinions, they will. And I think the OSCE organizational role is to absolutely maintain the political will. I'm firmly in the camp of an international tribunal for aggression, my personal opinion. But that takes political will. It takes funding, it takes courage. And the OSCE, if that has that institutional courage, can be at the forefront of that. That would be the first thing. But don't forget, forming a tribunal is that, you know, we think of that as the hard part. That's actually the easy part. The hard part is defense expertise, so that we have equality of arms, transmission of evidence, assistance to prosecutors, assistance to judges, you know, funding. That's the hard part. For me, and I'm a trial lawyer, so for me it's the implementation. I think that's the OSCE organizing role, to maintain political will, but also to get it right. It's a terrible thing to set up a tribunal and not support it politically, economically, technical expertise, et cetera, so that at the end of the day people say, that was just revenge, that was just justice. I think we owe it to the rule of law to set it up and then to do it correctly. That's just my personal opinion.
Great. We have to close. The speakers are going to be here in the room, and then if you have any questions, please approach them and ask. I have to thank all of our speakers on Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us, Irina, Arkady, Yevhen. I also want to say a special thank you to Christy Blewett. She is a talented international lawyer who actually helped writing the report. Unfortunately, she's not here in person, but I know that she's watching us, and the report is amazing. Thank you so much, Christy. Thank you, everyone.